Captain Harris blinked at the console, a glob of mustard stubbornly clinging to the corner of the charred screen. "Well, that's, suboptimal," he muttered, gingerly poking at the malfunctioning panel that had just decided their course for them. Lieutenant Jensen, who had been suspended in an impromptu handstand when the warp drive gave its dying cough, now dangled upside down from his harness. "Don't think I've ever seen suboptimal on the standard malfunction report, sir." "It's a first for me, too." Harris grunted, yanking a loose cable that sent a shower of sparks across his mustard-stained uniform. "Survey mission to the outer rim," they said. "Milk Run," they said. They, of course, were the ever-optimistic pencil pushers back at Earth Command, the ones who had greenlit a third-hand scout ship and a crew fresh out of the academy for a potentially decade-long exploration of the galactic boondocks. It was the least glamorous job in the fleet, which is probably why they got it. An insistent klaxon sliced through the ship's death rattle. "Proximity alert!" Jensen squawked, narrowly missing a head-first introduction to an overhead panel. "Proximity to what?" Harris barked. "We're in uncharted space." "Exactly. Wait, is that... Holy mother of... Brace for impact!" It all went downhill, or rather, down towards an unknown terrestrial body from there. The ship, barely more than a flying tin can against the gravitational pull of a full-fledged planet, shuddered violently before being unceremoniously dumped into a sprawling jungle. Harris awoke in a tangle of vines and remarkably intact Durasteel. The ship was more wrecked than vessel, but the groans from outside indicated at least some of his crew had survived. He extricated himself with a painted grimace and staggered towards a warped hatch. "Jensen? Lieutenant, report!" His second-in-command was perched rather precariously on a mossy boulder, staring at something in the dense undergrowth. "Sir, you're not going to believe this." Harris followed his gaze and did a double take worthy of a holodrama. Below, a group of decidedly primitive-looking humanoids, clad in animal skins and armed with sharpened sticks, were valiantly facing off against robots. Giant, laser-toting, distinctly unfriendly-looking robots. "Is this a fever dream?" Harris croaked. Jensen grinned, an expression at odds with the absurdity of their situation. "Welcome to the Outer Rim, sir. Looks like we found intelligent life." Harris squinted at the scene below, his head still spun from the less-than-graceful landing, and his understanding of the situation wasn't doing much better. Robots? Stone Age sentience? Was the galaxy secretly running some elaborate historical theme park? "Lieutenant, secure a perimeter. I want a first-hand look, but let's not introduce ourselves just yet." His orders were a touch redundant. Everyone seemed quite preoccupied by the decidedly lopsided battle unfolding in the clearing. Sliding between vines and ducking monstrous ferns, Harris and Jensen made their way closer to the chaos. To their shock, the humanoids weren't just holding their own, they were winning. Sure, the body count on their side was alarming, but their sheer ferocity made up for their lack of firepower. "They're like ants," Harris whispered, watching a wiry little woman tackle a 6-foot-tall robot, somehow sending it crashing to the ground with a perfectly executed leg sweep. "How?" His question was cut short by a guttural scream. One of the tribesmen sprinted towards them, panic etched across his face, a gleaming metal monstrosity hot on his heels. Instinct took over before Harris's brain could catch up. He stepped from behind a tree and, with a roar worthy of his rugby days, barreled directly into the robot. The impact sent him tumbling backwards, but he had the satisfaction of seeing the machine stumble, giving the fleeing man precious seconds. Harris scrambled to his feet, bracing for a counterattack. Instead, the laser fire stopped. He risked a glance and almost laughed out loud. The robot was staring at him as if it had just encountered a particularly baffling bug specimen. Then, its sensors seemed to focus on Harris's tattered uniform, the insignia glinting faintly in the dappled sunlight. With a disconcerting whirring sound, it saluted, and then turned tail and marched back into the dense foliage, joining a slow retreat of its metallic brethren. Jensen emerged from his hiding spot, face pale. Did you just order that thing away, sir?" Harris shook his head, utterly bewildered. "I hit it really hard?" The clearing erupted in cheers. The humanoids, battered but victorious, poured towards them. Harris found himself hoisted upon their shoulders, his cries of protest lost in the jubilation. He caught Jensen's eye, the lieutenant wearing an equal mix of confusion and manic excitement. "Suboptimal, huh?" Word of the Sky People and their miraculous aid spread through the tribes like wildfire. One minute, they were scrabbling for survival against their technologically superior oppressors, and the next, salvation had seemingly fallen from the heavens. The crash site became a makeshift camp, the humans treated with the reverence usually reserved for gods, a notion that made Harris increasingly uneasy. With the language barrier more insurmountable than a neutron star, they resorted to a bizarre form of charades. Jensen proved disturbingly adept at this, miming the use of a medkit to wild applause. Harris focused on the less abstract, utilizing his engineering know-how to fix salvaged tech and jury-rig some surprisingly effective upgrades to their primitive allies' weaponry. He felt a pang of guilt at every tinkered spear. With each passing day, it became harder to deny he was arming a burgeoning rebellion. The robots stayed away, their absence a worrying testament to their strategic intelligence. But the tribes were emboldened. Whispers turned into war cries. Harris found himself caught up in strategic councils, hunkering around a firelight, and painstakingly sketched maps in the dirt. These weren't just skirmishes now. There was an unnerving pattern to the tribe's unified attacks, a pattern that looked suspiciously like rudimentary military tactics. One evening, huddled with the wiry woman they'd learned, through much frantic gesticulation, was called Anya. The leader of this patchwork army, Harris felt the strings of a truly terrible idea. He glanced at the crude topographical map, at Anya's fiercely determined face, and blurted, "What if they never attacked in the first place?" Her expression was questioning, the universal language barrier rearing its ugly head. Harris pressed on, his voice barely a whisper. "What if we could disable them before they even have the chance?" Anya's eyes widened, a glimmer of ferocious comprehension appearing. It was a frighteningly intoxicating moment. This was no longer a simple survival mission. It felt suspiciously like war brewing, and Harris, the captain of a barely functional tin can, had lit the match. The mission to the robot's central stronghold was, by all logic, a suicide mission. Harris was fairly certain it violated at least a dozen intergalactic treaties, but as they sneaked through the jungle, Anya and her hunters moving with the eerie silence of apex predators, he couldn't shake the feeling of inevitability. He hadn't signed up for this, hadn't wanted this, but here he was, a bumbling intergalactic conqueror. They found the core not in some imposing metallic fortress, but nestled within a vast, dormant volcano. Its exposed circuitry and pulsing energy nodes spoke of a crude, yet undeniably efficient design. Harris had seen schematics like this before, rudimentary power sources, the kind used by civilizations just emerging from the industrial age. It hit him then, a wave of cold reality. These robots weren't some malevolent alien force, but tools created by a hidden faction of the natives themselves. "Anya, wait!" His call was hushed, frantic, and completely lost on the woman whose eyes burned with a lifetime of bitter vengeance. Before he could explain, before he could even figure out how to explain, their attack began. It was a massacre in reverse. Armed with Harris's hastily enhanced spears, empowered with electromagnetic charges, the tribesmen were a whirlwind of focused fury. Cables were ripped, energy nodes shattered, and the hulking metal defenders crumpled with disturbing ease. At the heart of the chaos, Harris found himself torn between pride in his engineering and the horrified realization that he had enabled a brutal act of genocide. The aftermath was a scene of uneasy triumph. The robots lay inert, mere skeletons of their former menacing selves, yet the silence was not one of victory. Anya, surveying the carnage, wore no triumphant smile, but a pensive frown. She turned to Harris, and for the first time, he saw not adoration in her eyes, but a kind of wariness, the respect afforded to a dangerous beast. News of the fallen stronghold rippled across the planet with astonishing speed. Harris wasn't sure how, carrier pigeon, smoke signals, or some tribal form of radio he couldn't comprehend, but the result was undeniable. Delegations arrived from far-flung villages, bearing strange offerings and speaking in even stranger tongues. Each bowed low before him, tied a fealty he wasn't sure he wanted. It was, of all things, Jensen who broke through the daze. He'd taken to wearing feathers in his hair, and grinned like a madman. "Sir," he said, "think we might have a situation." Harris barked out a humorous laugh. "Situation? Lieutenant, we've conquered a bloody planet." "Not by design, nor by any grand act of valor. but by a series of colossal errors and the sheer audacity of the desperate. There was an awful irony in it all. They made their palace in a sprawling network of caves, formerly the residence of the now distinctly less powerful robotic overlords. It was a bizarre sort of existence. Harris found himself learning woodcarving. Anya insisted it was a skill worthy of a leader. Jensen, bless him, had become the de facto diplomat, using a bewildering combination of pictograms and wild gestures to negotiate everything from treaties to dinner menus. Harris, meanwhile, spent his days poring over the salvage tech. It was painfully simple, a twisted testament to the unseen inventors, a faction of this world desperate enough to turn technology into a means of oppression. The guilt gnawed at him, amplified by the weight of unintentional power thrust upon him. It came to a head during one particularly baffling ceremony. Surrounded by chanting tribesmen, festooned in more feathers than a galactic bird sanctuary, Harris was about to be presented with what looked suspiciously like a crown made of polished bone. He couldn't do it. Enough! His voice cracked through the chanting. An uneasy silence fell over the cavern. Anya, eternally patient, waited with a raised eyebrow. Harris swallowed his pride and whatever remnants of intergalactic protocol he could recall. I'm not. He stumbled over the words, keenly aware of the weight of 100 expectant eyes on him. This planet. He gestured around him. It's yours. I never meant to take it. A ripple of confusion washed over the crowd. He glanced at Jensen, pleading for help. His ever-reliable second-in-command, however, was staring with an open-mouthed shock. Anya approached not with anger, but a strange mix of curiosity and concern. Take what? She asked. The question was simple. The translator device clipped to her ear, rendering it into flat English, but its implications were anything but. Harris felt a cold dread settle in his gut. Your home, your world, he explained slowly. The robots, the fighting, we thought... But you weren't at war, were you? Anya's frown increased to near cosmical proportions. Then she did the unexpected. She laughed. It wasn't scornful, but of genuine mirth. Gesturing at the remains of the defeated robots, she spoke. These? They are not war. They are sport. Harris stared, uncomprehending. Anya gestured grandly towards the cavern, towards the chanting tribesmen, the scattered machinery. Contest. We build. We fight. Strongest tribe wins. Understanding dawned, slow and horrifying. The battles, the desperation, the near-robotic obedience of their metallic adversaries. It wasn't war. It was the intergalactic equivalent of a football tournament, and they just accidentally won the Super Bowl. He wasn't sure if he should laugh, cry, or send a very, very apologetic transmission to Earth Command. Instead, he did something distinctly human. He fainted. It took surprisingly few pictograms and a lot of mimicking to straighten out the monumental misunderstanding that had turned them into accidental warlords. The tribes, once they got over the initial shock of their gods, being colossal idiots, seemed more amused than offended. Turns out, declaring interplanetary peace is significantly easier than declaring war. The cave became a hub of a different kind. Harris used his remaining tech to initiate what could be best described as a crash course in technological advancement. He taught them basic principles, not enough to create anything resembling modern society, but enough, he hoped, to avoid them reinventing the robot death matches. Jensen found his true calling as a cultural anthropologist, armed with his ever-present sketchbook and an almost unnerving ability to learn on the fly. He documented everything from the tribal customs to incredibly complex sporting rulebooks. Anya, to Harris's relief, took back the crown-like monstrosity, but she also kept the carved spear he'd fashioned on a whim. A symbol, she explained, of their strength stemming not from above, but from within. The day their ship was finally repaired came with mixed emotions. There was relief, yes, and a longing for a hot shower that bordered on desperation, yet there was also a bittersweet ache. Harris stood beside Anya, overlooking the valley. It still bore the scars of their grand misadventure, but amidst the wreckage, new growth pushed its way through. We'll leave behind beacons, he said, hoping the galactic cartographers would have a sense of humor. Warning signs to keep others away. Anya merely nodded, her gaze fixed on a group of children dismantling a fallen robot with far more efficiency than they ought to. Perhaps, she murmured, they will read them as challenges. She turned to him then, and for the first time, offered a smile that held true warmth. You go in peace, Skyman, and take care not to conquer any more worlds by mistake. As their ship lifted towards the stars, Harris was pretty damn certain he wouldn't, but he kept a close eye on the navigation panel all the same. Some adventures, it turned out, were best kept to just one.